Gentlemen, Ubisoft has finally shown their Assassin's Creed Shadows gameplay preview. 13 minutes of pure gameplay with very little cutscenes, and I have to say that things are looking not horrible. I'm cautiously optimistic, almost excited about this game, and I want to share why. I've got my beautiful girlfriend with me here, Sophie, who is an Assassin's Creed expert. If you want to share a little bit about your experience with Assassin's Creed,
I've watched him play Mirage.
which is all you need to know that Assassin's Creed is going down the shithole. But this 13-minute gameplay preview actually might make old school fans and new school fans excited. There's a lot that I want to talk about, both good and bad, but I have to say pretty impressed with what we saw, and I'm trying to temper my Assassin's Creed fan syndrome of getting excited at anything new that has to do with Assassin's Creed, and I know a lot of you are going through the same thing right now. But I genuinely believe that there are a lot of things that in a few weeks, once the hype dies down, are still going to be extremely impressive. And some things that, I am worried about and I want to discuss. So Sophie and I are going to go through the trailer and speak about the things that we were very impressed with, things that we noticed as we go through the trailer. So this is going to be a quick review giving our first impressions, but we'll definitely talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows more as the weeks go by. First thing you notice with this is that Ubisoft has once again cooked with the open world environment. Walking past the red posts and having the whole rice fields open up to you is just absolutely breathtaking. You can see that Ubisoft's environmental design team just really doesn't miss when it comes to environmental design.
I would say that compared to Origins and Mirage, it does feel a bit empty, kind of like Odyssey and Valhalla.
Yeah, this is one thing that we noticed in the trailer, and then we'll probably talk about it as the gameplay showcase kind of goes through, which is that there's a lot of superficial beauty to this game, but we're worried that there's not going to be a lot of in-depth immersion that comes with the set dressing of this game. And obviously that's not something you can tell from a pre-rendered, pre-planned gameplay showcase where they're going to have all the NPC interactions and everything happening at once to make you feel like this is a living and breathing world. But we did notice that obviously this is Odyssey's design team, so maybe they suffer from the same empty world syndrome, even though it's extremely beautiful. The first half of the showcase begins with Yasuke, who's the combat-focused character, and later on we'll see some of that combat, and I must say that there is a lot of promise that maybe there is more to the combat system and more depth than there has been in the last few games, but also a little bit of worry about some of the abilities or things that you might be able to do just from an old school fan's perspective. He then hugs a dog because I don't know why people love the ability to hug dogs or cats in the game. We start developing the storyline for a quest that seems to be some run-of-the-mill side quest when it comes to hunting down and assassinating characters, helping the people that are oppressed, kind of Assassin's Creed by the numbers storytelling. And this is one thing that was probably the first negative that I noticed, was the cutscene that triggers now between Yasuke and this old lady. One of the problems that Valhalla had that Odyssey didn't have, actually, to give a little bit of credit to Odyssey, is the fact that most of their cutscenes were mocapped or very well animated, and the use of their camera to show the cutscene was actually pretty well done. In this cutscene, it's just over-the-shoulder, non-cinematic cutscene with really bad lip syncing, which is something that this engine, I think, has really struggled with over the past 4 games. I don't know why. The lip syncing and the facial animations during dialogue are just so stiff and unhuman-like, even for something that's supposed to be this next-gen PS5 game. So during this whole cutscene, even though I was very impressed by the fidelity graphically of the entire scene, I was very thrown off by how they just refused to make good facial animations. But I must say that the Yasuke voice actor is extremely impressive. So opening up here, I want to talk about the UI, because I'm very impressed by the UI design, how minimalist it is, how clean it is, and how much you can just immerse yourself into the world. And on the top left, you kind of see the standard RPG look that you have for most missions since Origins, where you kind of have a series of objectives that you need to investigate, and you just have to complete it. Very by the numbers. This is definitely an iteration from the last few games. I can definitely feel like it's a next-gen version, a more advanced version, and I can see how much work they've put into it. But it's not like a new style of Assassin's Creed like we used to get from Revelations to 3 or from, Black Flag to Unity. It's definitely an iteration, a slight step up in terms of design philosophy from the other games. This is another scene where we were just mesmerized by how beautiful it is. And one thing they mention actually is that there's a full year cycle, which is extremely impressive to say the least. Here we have a quick cutscene where we identify the target and we go into the combat section, which I was pretty okay with. I'm a stealth player mainly, so I'm not huge into combat, but usually combat is extremely limited in these games. And here we've seen that they've really taken it a step up. Yasuke begins with using a heavy weapon, and you can see something that people are going to talk about a lot, I think, over the coming weeks, which is how destructible the environment is. We've never really had that much of a destructible environment in Assassin's Creed. It's never really been a mechanic that we even look for or ask for, but you can see that it really adds to the dynamism of a fight scene when this guy's just bashing people around and things are breaking around him. Another thing that I want to say is that it seems there is now stance-based combat in Assassin's Creed, which is something that was really needed if they were going to compete with Ghost of Tsushima when it comes to making a Japanese stealth and combat game. And you can see this even more when Yasuke later on brings out his katana. The abilities is one thing I'm worried about because I think they can get a little bit unrealistic, a little bit too out there for my personal taste, because I tend to like more grounded games. But so far, everything seems pretty grounded, pretty cool, and, you know, a couple things that might not be the most realistic things, but, you know, who cares? But I tend to not like RPG combat all that much, so these abilities probably aren't going to be my thing unless they're, you know, really immersive and really cool. And here he finally takes out his katana, and we can see what I'm probably going to be using most of the time in combat, which is the katana. The animation's amazing. The stance-based combat seems very engaging, which is going to add a lot of depth to the combat. And the finishing animations are absolutely brutal. It also seems there's a lot of visual cues to tell you when enemies are kind of depleted by breaking down their armor, breaking down their helmets, and finally going in for the kill. And another thing I want to just randomly say is that Yasuke is fucking huge. Like, that guy, I don't know, he's like 6'2", and he towers over every single enemy, which kind of feeds into the combat-focused enemy archetype, which I kind of like because you actually have two characters that play differently for once, but I also kind of hate because I wish that sometimes I could play stealthily with him. He decapitates the dude, which is absolutely brutal, and I love the fact that there's dismemberment and decapitations from Valhalla. This game feels like it's blending in things from Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, which I really, really enjoy. And this is where we finally switch to Naoe. This is the part that I'm really interested in. As I said, I'm primarily a stealth player, and I'm probably going to spend most of my time playing as Naoe. And I think that what we're going to see now is truly, I have to say, just impressive from a game design standpoint, from a stealth player standpoint. The scene that's going to unfold and the mechanics that we're going to see make me very, very optimistic for this game, because usually when you see a game that's trying to cater to both players, you don't really end up pleasing anyone. But so far, the combat seems like the combat enthusiasts are going to like, because there's more depth than before. There's special abilities, but there's also depth to the normal combat with stances and parries and everything that you want, and different weapon variety. And then for stealth players like me, there seems like there's a robust and deep stealth system that builds off of Mirage, actually, which had a very good stealth system. We're going to look into that now, and it'll allow me to talk about a third thing that I was hoping to see more of in this gameplay trailer that we didn't really see, which is movement or parkour. It seems like the free running again is taking a sidestep in this game, because it's going to be a very open world, very low verticality open world. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of free running or parkour that's going to challenge us or allow us to express ourselves freely. But there are a couple movement things that we'll see now, which I think are very impressive. So she waits until nightfall, and she infiltrates this palace by swinging with her rope or something. There's probably an official name for it, but I'm not going to look it up right now. And immediately goes into an air assassination, which is huge, because if you can combo moves between movement and stealth, that's a huge ability for player expression that I'm really glad that they allowed for. Then she goes into something that I really love seeing, which is her crawling on the grass, which is much more immersive when it comes to the classic stealth hide in high grass kind of mechanic. The fact that she's actually crawling, limiting movement and adding more immersion is wonderful. And then again into a new mechanic where she throw something to destroy the lights, distract the guard, and hide herself in shadows. This is a mechanic that was already teased in a lot of the leaks that I love seeing, because it's a really immersive way of putting you in that environment. Then she does a running assassination, and then like a flying long-range assassination with one of her tools, which is incredibly impressive and a huge way to add interest to the stealth sections. Another thing you'll notice is that when she's in the shadows, kind of like in Origami, she's technically hidden. She doesn't have to be within high grass or anywhere else to be hidden, as long as she's in the shadows during the nighttime. That's a great mechanic that's going to allow for a lot of freedom when it comes to stealth plays. Then we see her scaling a wall and air assassinating a guard. It triggers a mini cutscene, which I really hope doesn't trigger all of the time, because it's going to get really old really fast. But it looks pretty cool, you know, with the nighttime as the backdrop. Then we see her stalking and seeing the guards patrolling. This is a very by-the-numbers formulaic stealth section in Assassin's Creed, and I don't think they've innovated on it too much, but the mechanics with which you can infiltrate this and attack these guards definitely has improved. The assassination animations are looking great, and we see here she drags this woman inside, that there's a non-lethal option, which means technically you can probably ghost most of her sections, which if you're a stealth player, ghost means kind of going through a stealth section without killing anyone, which is a very immersive and cool way of going through a stealth level. A lot of the animations, I think, might get a little bit old if there's not a lot of repetition, but one here I've never seen in my life, and I think is so cool, which is Naoe kind of stabbing a guard through one of these paper-thin walls that you had in feudal Japan, and then opening it. Super cinematic, super immersive. Every 5 or 10 seconds, there was something that I was completely, like, taken back with, because of how new or impressive it was. And this is one of them where you can actually climb to the ceiling to hide from an enemy coming through. So you can probably distract guards, lure them in with noise, and then make your escape or kill them depending on what you want to do. That's something that I think is incredibly cool. This whole stealth section, I have to say, was just incredibly impressive.
My question here, though, is if that's just a cutscene, because it would have been so much better to me if it was not.
Yeah, there's a couple moments that if they always trigger cutscenes, it's going to get really, really old and feel really outdated if the gameplay is not seamless. But I really hope that it's just kind of like for the gameplay purposes. What we see here is a lot of environmental storytelling that we saw from Origins that we're going to probably see a lot of in Assassin's Creed Shadows. Then she throws something, I don't know if it's a shuriken or a throwing knife or something else, but again, long-range assassination seems like a very viable option for stealth, and I hope that they limit it through limiting the quantity of things that you can use. And this is probably one of the coolest stealth moments in the entire run-through, where now it kind of goes into the pond and waits inside of the pond while losing breath, but then uses a straw to breathe from the outside and remain hidden. This is a mechanic that I don't think I've seen in any stealth game, which is incredibly immersive and so cool that I'm definitely going to be using a lot. And then it leads into the assassination, which again seems to trigger a black and white filter, which is a nice callback to a lot of different Japanese movies. And then it goes into a little bit of combat to see that she can also, you know, for lack of a better term, shred lots of different things apart, like bamboo and people. Then we lead into the escape section, which is what kind of left me a little bit sour. And again, it's that it seems like there's very generic free running and parkour in this game. Nothing too exciting in terms of technicality or traversal, but still looking great. The game is beautiful, very immersive, lots of different weather, lots of different mechanics for stealth and combat. Overall, extremely impressed with this trailer. What do you think, Sophie?
So I have a question, because I've seen in previous Assassin's Creed games how like you change seasons and such. So could you explain what does it mean to have a 1-year engine?
So, great question. I actually have no fucking idea, but the way that I'm interpreting it is basically unrelated to the narrative. There's going to be a constant day, month, season, and year cycle. So usually when you're playing an open world game, you have what's called a day-night cycle, which means that as you're going throughout the game, there's a fictional clock that passes within the game that switches constantly between morning, midday, afternoon, night, and then morning again. And that's a very common thing that happens in a lot of open world games. It's a day-night cycle. And usually if there's a change in seasons within games, it's usually narrative driven. For example, in Assassin's Creed 3, once you complete certain missions, you arrive at certain seasons within the game. Like there's certain sections that are in winter in Boston, and then there's like summer in New York and things like that. But they're narrative driven. What seems to be happening here is that there's an internal clock so complex that it actually tells the game at what point a new day comes, at what point a new week comes, and there so on and so forth until a new year comes, changing through the entire seasons, unrelated to the narrative, which is so cool. A little bit dangerous if you can't control it, because if you're trying to make content or trying to replay missions or practice a run or kind of get some level of consistency and reduce RNG, practicing a lot of your runs in summer and then suddenly it's winter and you can't use half of the things, like immersing yourself in that lake, might be a little bit annoying, but hopefully you can develop some sort of skill to control the time of year. And I think that's going to be incredible. That's what I'm assuming the whole year cycle is. If it's narrative driven, then it's not that revolutionary or that interesting from a mechanical or technical standpoint. But I think that it means that there's actually an independent internal clock that goes for a year, which is absolutely insane, to be honest.
So does that mean that you may be able to play the same mission in all these different seasons?
One thing that I don't know is the answer to that question, because the RPG games aren't really fond of replayability. They don't really like you replaying missions unless you do a manual save. The old games, you could literally just like hit checkpoint, reload checkpoint, and restart the mission, which is wonderful for a million different reasons. The RPG games don't like you doing that. And if you're going to make a manual save, logic would dictate that the manual save also saves the time of the year in which it was. So I don't think you can actually replay the missions in different seasons unless there's like a new game mode. But if you complete the mission in summer and manually save it in summer, there's no real other option for you to complete it in winter, which is a good point actually that I hadn't thought of.
Okay, so I just want to say I obviously, well, not obviously, but I prefer the female protagonist, and I thought she was so like agile, stealthy, and I really loved her. You're saying that the parkour is not very complex and such, but the way she was just jumping around, jumping onto the enemies and like climbing with ropes, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the traversal system is much more advanced than the past few games, especially with the rope now that she can climb with. What I mean by the parkour not being complex is that the animations are beautiful and there's a lot of cool opportunities for swinging and climbing and scaling that are really engaging. But when it comes to getting from point A to point B through self-expression and complex parkour movements like side ejects or side hops or back ejects or whatever, there doesn't seem to be a lot of that. It seems to be substituted by, like you said, a tool like the rope or cool animations where she looks cool doing certain things, but they're very simplistic and pre-rendered animations that don't really give you a lot of player flexibility compared to the older games. But that's just something that I noticed. Another thing I have to say is that so far the voice actress is mid. Like the voice acting is so fucking mid for the female protagonist, which I hate because she's the one I'm going to be playing 90% of the game with. And Yasuke's voice actor seems wonderful. He seems very talented, and I think that he's going to give a great performance, and I hope that the female voice actress does as well.
I'm not sure if we mentioned this, but one part that we reacted to very positively when we first watched the trailer was the snorkeling.
Yeah, no, I talked about that. The snorkeling. Oh, okay. Yeah, the snorkeling when she like dives into the like lake and sucks through a straw to get air. Yeah, I mentioned that. Insane. So cool. Like I've never seen that in a stealth game in my life, especially in a AAA like game. That's such a cool, and it's a cool niche mechanic. You know what I mean? Like how many times is there going to be a fucking pond next to a target? But the fact that there's an ability for you to breathe within that is just insane.
Yeah, because you did mention, oh, it's got a timer, but then also you can breathe through the tube, and it's just like such a big difference between that and like maybe a pond or a pool in Mirage, for example, where you just like can stay there for as long as you want and you have no real constraints.
Yeah, it seems that in terms of movement, they've added a new stance for locomotion. Locomotion is basically just how you get through the world, because you normally have walking, running, sprinting, jumping, whatever, and then you have crouching, which is like the stealth, like, oh my god, I'm in stealth mode because I'm crouching. Now it seems like there's crawling, which is extra stealth mode. This is like mega stealth mode, because you normally have that in some older games like Metal Gear Solid, and you've never really had it in Assassin's Creed. And it seems like it's context based. I don't think you can crawl all the time, but maybe I'm wrong. But it definitely leads to things like, oh, I can crawl into a pond and hide there. I hope that the breathing straw is something you unlock, because that way there's a risk reward when you haven't unlocked it to how long you can stay in the pond waiting for guards to turn around before you can strike them down. And I also like that sometimes you can't even crawl into the pond. Like if it's winter, the ponds will be frozen over. Things like that. It just seems like this finally is going to feel like a next-gen Assassin's Creed game. And obviously it's not my ideal next-gen Assassin's Creed game because it's still a huge open-world RPG. But for what we were getting, I'm very, very impressed so far with the gameplay reveal. Much more than I thought I was going to be.
What do you think about the story? How is it that going to play out?
The story, I don't think we've seen enough to know. Right now, honestly, to be overly cynical, it seems like a by-the-numbers Assassin's Creed like revenge plot of like, oh my god, we're getting oppressed, but if we join the people together we can like liberate them or whatever the fuck. I think that hopefully there's some sort of twist or depth to it that makes it engaging, but right now I'm putting my money on the gameplay being more interesting than the story, especially because for me the story is deeply affected by dialogue and by voice acting. And the dialogue and the voice acting that we saw, for the most part, was astonishingly subpar in terms of the bits of dialogue they chose to show and how cringy and badly written they were, and how a lot of the voice acting was really, really bad. Apart from Yasuke and a couple other characters that I thought were great, for the most part, just from the narrative writing perspective, seems to be mind-bendingly subpar for the amount of money they've put into this game. But again, it was 13 minutes out of probably 60, 70 hours of content. So we'll have to see what the main story is like and what everything happens. Again, no sign of the Assassin's Creed in a game set in the 1500s. Red flag. So now I'm just really interested to see what role the Creed plays in this game, because if it doesn't, there's very little excuse they can have now when it's a game set deep into the kind of peak of the Assassin's Creed, actually. So I'm really interested to see how that evolves. But from a gameplay perspective, I must say I'm very, very optimistic for what we've seen.
So what's next in terms of teasers? What's the next trailer reveal?
I think that from now, I mean, it's releasing in November, so I think now it's just going to be like the typical marketing that Ubisoft does, is some sort of video documentary with the developers where they show a little bit of footage with a little bit of documentary footage, and then they'll probably show customization, they'll show the story, they'll show the gameplay more in depth, and then probably close to release they'll show something big again. But I think now it's just going to mostly be audience building through engagement with the dev studio, with, you know, behind the scenes, kind of how we made the game, stuff like that they normally do to kind of engage people. And I think that we'll see a decent amount of gameplay teasers, but nothing as big as this for a while, I think.
Good.
Well, that was it. Over the next few weeks, they're probably going to share more gameplay, and there's probably going to be a lot of YouTubers who are going to break it down and analyze all these news. I'm not one of them. I usually make videos based on lore or gameplay or the philosophy of the Assassin's Creed. So if you like that, feel free to subscribe. And if you want to watch a video like that where I talk about lore accurate ways to play Assassin's Creed Unity, you can watch this video now.